The world was quiet. Her hair floated around in her face. She didn't feel the sting of her wounds here. Everything felt the same. It all seemed almost as if her cares were a mile away. The last of her oxygen left in her mouth and flew past her face. Her lungs began to burn. She wanted to hold it for a little longer, but her body defied her. Pinky gasped, taking in huge breaths of air as she resurfaced from the bucket of water. She panted heavily as she tried to relax, calm her beating heart. She had just survived staring death in the face. That thing, that monster, that slender pony. She knew it was getting close to its death wish, and when it had gotten close enough to mind, had fallen into a haze, unlike she ever never experienced before. Then there was a head-splitting pain. She gingerly touched her rewrapped head wounds. The cuts rose from attack on her room and started to heal, but the slender pony had left a deep gash down the middle of her forehead. But she survived. The cut was only stung a little now, and that would soon fade soon. The bandages on her legs will also need to be changed. After all that running had reopened, the bite wound in her leg was currently throbbing as it recovered. She shook her head and mane, casting all the water off to her head. That soak had relaxed her some, but she was still inside of that school. The school where she had been chased inside that only world came to her mind that could describe her as the other world. One that would separate yet almost the same. She lowered her head and began gulping down the bucket of water. She hadn't realized how thirsty she was at first, but she remembered how much crying and running she had been doing, and suddenly her throat felt as dry as a desert. She quickly emptied the bucket of its contents into her mouth. Her tongue lampered at the bottom of the bucket expectantly, but there was no more water to be had. She softly sighed as she pulled her head back up and looked around the empty cafeteria that she was in. She was able to imagine back what it was like in Princeton condition. All the little foals that would gather around eating lunch as they took a break from their day of learning. Friends would share their gossip stories, adventures, and games that they were playing at home. Some would doodle and some would spend time by themselves. But lunchtime and recess were always the times the foals' favorite part of school. Those days were long gone in this place, aren't they? Pinky sighed. She then stared at the empty, dust-covered rooms. The tables had been emptied and abandoned for a long time now, and had no foals visited in these halls. Even with the brief glimpse at the playful ghost foals had gone away and left the empty silence. She took a soft breath and began to pick up the red ribbon. She hadn't offer soaked her head. She gently tied it into a bow at the end of her mane once more. She was growing very fond of this ribbon, not only being a gift from Gummy, but it seemed to give her a sense of normalcy during these calm moments. When she had just had time to herself, it just seemed to put her mind a bit on ease, knowing it was there. "I guess," she said, taking a deep breath and turning her head, "all that's left to do now is open this box," she said, looking down at the bottom of the box sat next to her, but next to the bucket. She hadn't noticed and looked inside of it. In fact, she wanted to leave it there. She even almost wanted to smash it. But she decided to destroy the box. Just that slender pony who had to wander off made her stomach twist in anger. But forces beyond the understanding compelled her to bring it with her. She had to put it down with some water, and now she had just finished it. It sat there mocking her. "Maybe I can smash it after I find out what's inside?" She reasoned with herself, giving herself enough confidence to finally open it. She actually carefully lifted open the brown lid, expecting it to burst on fire upon her touching. The lid finally slid off easily as she looked inside of it. "Why is it in here?" she asked. Then she stared in shock at what sat in the box. It was the key to Sugar Cube Corner. Why would he have this? Why would he give it to me? The questions racked in Pinky's mind, but no answers came. She just had come from that area. After all, her home was right above Sugar Cube Corner. "I can't believe I forgot to check on the same store itself!" Pinky kicked herself mentally. She then looked at the key again, then remembered what she had seen in her room and sighed. "No, I can't believe I didn't check it last. Not after that filly attacked me. I did want to get out of there as quick as I could. She carefully picked up the key and placed it into her bag. She had to go back and find out what happened in Sugar Cube Corner now. She then carefully replaced the lid on the brown box before packing it up and dropping it to the ground. She lifted her good leg and smashed the box under her hoof. It let out a satisfying crunch as she crushed it. The snow had started to pile up thickly at her hooves, and the town looked just as if it had a white blanket cover it. Every part of town had snow on it, the streets, the roofs, and the trees. Pinkie had never seen the town covered in snow this way before. There had always been ponies that made sure the town was still usable during the winter, clearing the streets and making sure that snow didn't pile up too thickly. Each step of the crunch of snow, as cold as the ground sank beneath her. She shivered even more now, wishing that she had brought some winter clothes to keep warm. Normally she did well in the cold, but the snow kept getting her coat wet. She could feel the ice started to form at the base of her legs. The Sugar Cube Corner finally came into view. She sighed in relief. She had seen groaners in distant fog, but none had come close to her. She had managed to make it there, only suffering from the cold. She went up to the door and her favorite bakery and gently tried to open it. The door was locked, and as she expected it, even she had to try checking on it earlier. She would just have to give in and move on. She carefully pulled the key out of the store bag and placed it into the lock on the door, unlocking. Pinkie watched as the key turned into ash, just as it stood the school key before it. She just let out a soft sigh as she pushed open the door, stepping inside. As she expected, Sugar Cube Corner was dark, just like her room had been. Scant amount of light entered the room. As she looked around, she quickly reached into her bag, pulling out the lantern. She was thankful that she had refilled it with oil back in the cafeteria as she set the flame alight. To her surprise, Sugar Cube Corner looked fine. There were no pastries on the shelves or counters, but there was a lack of dust and decay. In fact, the place had been even decorated. There were even some ribbons and banners and balloons set up all over the shop. There was even a table set up for holding snacks and punch. Several games placed in various locations, as well as a pile of presents on another table. There was a banner that tied from one pole to the other above. It read, "Welcome Pinkie Pie." "Are these decorations for me?" Pinkie asked, placing the lantern down on the table to illuminate the room. "Oh, do we have a guest?" "I love guests," came the voice that sounded all too familiar. Pinkie stopped as she looked around. She hadn't seen any pony's voice since she entered this horrible place, and then she was suddenly filled with hope. "Yes, you do have a guest. It's me, Pinkie Pie." Pinkie quickly called out excitedly, wanting to meet the other pony right now. "Who are you? Come on out. I promise I'm not like one of those monsters outside." "Oh, really?" The voice chuckled. "It's just so hard to tell these days who is and isn't," the voice said cheerfully. "Please, will you come out? I'd really like to see your face," Pinkie said. She didn't care what the voice seemed to sound familiar. She just wanted to see some pony. "Okie dokie dokie, since you asked so nicely." A blob of darkness in the corner of the room began to move. It seemed manifest to the form of the pony before Pinkie's eyes. The shadows surrounding the pony faded, as the light soon gave her the form. Pinkie gasped in shock, covering her mouth with a hoof. "What's the matter? You seem so surprised to see me. You said your name was Pinkie Pie, right?" "What a coincidence! My name's Pinkie Pie, too." So there was no doubt. The bright pink coat, the frizzy-up curly mane and tail, and the blue and yellow little balloons for a cutie mark, the bouncing, bubbly attitude. It was Pinkie Pie. "But that's going to get confusing if we both start calling each other Pinkie Pie," she explained. She then stopped bouncing for a moment, thinking, "Should we give you a nickname?" "What? But Pinkie couldn't think of any way to say. Why was there anything for the two of her? And this Pinkie didn't seem to be suffering of all the sadness or despair, and she wasn't even covered in any bandages. She didn't look hurt. Pinkie looked exactly like she did before the nightmares had started to affect her, and this town wasn't helping her. "Oh, I see. Your hair is down. So that means you're sad? You must be. The only time my hair goes down is when I'm sad. So we can call you Sadie Pie? The happy version of Pinkie Pie bounced again. Why are you sad, Sadie Pie? Did someone hurt steal your sweets? You can always make more, you know. She giggled merrily. Oh, I know what will turn that frown upside down. Let's have some cupcakes. Cupcakes? Pinkie said, a little hesitantly. But I want to get out of this town. Aw, you want to go? Happy Pinkie Pie said, tilting her head. But you only just got here. Come on, there's so much fun for us to have. She then bounced over to this door on the side of Sugar Cube Corner, the one that led to the basement. She opened the door and then turned back around. Come on and follow me. We'll have lots of fun. Then we can make those cupcakes. The happy Pinkie Pie bounced into the darkness of the stairs, disappearing from sight. Pinkie just stared in disbelief. The second Pinkie disappeared from sight, she couldn't believe her own eyes. Surely she was the only Pinkie Pie here, right? She had to find out why there was a second Pinkie Pie, so she grabbed a lantern and slowly followed down the stairs to the basement. She could hear the constant giggling of herself far down in the darkness. For some reason, she may have preferred the silence. She hit the bottom of the stairs and looked up, expecting to see the basement. Instead, there was a large hallway before her, with a series of 4 wooden doors, along with the final wooden door at the end. Come on, let's play already, the chipper voice echoed throughout the hallway. Pinkie couldn't tell which direction it came from. She only slowly walked up to the first door and then opened it. Entering slowly, inside the room she got shocked. She saw the familiar look in the living room of the farm. Here, you should eat something. The ghostly image of her father had placed a bowl of soup right before a ghostly image of her younger self, wrapped in a blanket. I'm not hungry, her younger self had already muttered in response. She bundled herself up tighter to the blanket. You haven't ate anything since you got back. Please, you have to eat. Her father sat down on the couch next to his daughter. I don't ever want to eat again, young Pinkie said, her voice quivering with fear. Her father had placed his head around his shaking daughter, holding her close to his body. The images faded away. The room was quiet, and Pinkie had stared at the images that she had just seen. Was that a memory? She asked herself. It certainly wasn't a memory she could remember. The words of her father had spoken felt obnoxious, but she couldn't think of any way why they would seem that way. She saw something out of the corner of her eye, looking on the left of the table where the soup had been placed. On top of it was a green tile with the image of a cat on it. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she felt as if it was something important. She made sure to quickly grab it and place it inside of her bag. She then exited out of the room, closing the door behind her. You do want to have fun, don't you? Came the cheerful voice that echoed throughout the hallway once again. Pinkie ignored it for the moment, opening the door across from the first one. Inside the door, she saw an interrogation room, one she could have seen during the local authorities when she was little. Can't you see she's been through a lot? A ghostly image of her mother told her in the ghostly police cult. She was hugging by Pinkie's daughter. Your questions are upsetting her. The young pink filly was shaking in her mother's arms, reassuringly. I apologize profusely. We're not trying to scare her, but we need to know what happened, the colt said, reassuringly. You need to give my daughter time, her father admittedly said. This has been a tough time for all of us. We understand, and you have our condolences, but if we need to know the details, once we do, we could bring this whole affair to an end quickly, the colt returned. Images faded from the room once more, leaving behind the pink tile interrogation table. It was another scene that didn't exist in her memories. This one confused her than the last one, not knowing what reason she could have been in the interrogation room like that. She examined the title, seeing that it had a picture of a bird on it. She quickly placed it inside of her bag before exiting the room as well. Oh, you're going to make me wait, aren't you? The chipper Pinkie Pie echoed through the hallway, sounding disappointment. Pinkie softly shook her head. The voice of the other Pinkie Pie was unsettling to her. Hearing herself talk without being heard just felt unnatural. She carefully walked through the door, opening it and stepping inside. This time she saw her bedroom from the farm. 3 beds lined the room, one for each of them as the parents had slept in different rooms. Come on, sis. You need to get some help. It's getting late. The ghostly image of her older sister Octavia was trying to comfort the young pink filly. They were sleeping in the same bed as the Her sister hugged her tightly. I know you're having a hard time, but I'm here. You know I won't let anything happen to you. The young filly began to sob into Octavia's coat. The two of them embraced as the images fade once more. They sat on the still of the rare bed on the red tile with the image and picture of a snake on it. Pinky wiped away a tear that had begun to form at the edge of her eye. She didn't know why these emotions were welling up inside of her. The images were all too real to not be true, but why could she not remember them? She carefully placed the red tile in her bag before she exited out of the room. Come on, I've prepared a party for you and everything. She still sounded happy, but she was like getting impatient. Pinky shook her head softly. She had to see what was in the other door now. That other Pinky could wait. She opened the final door on the sides of the hallway, stepping into the room that had its walls painted like the sky. The ground was covered in sand and rocks, and it looked like the outside of the rock farm. So you're sure this is what you want? Her ghostly father asked once again. Yeah, it's just, I don't think I should stay here anymore, her younger self responded slowly. I understand, her mother commented, standing right next to her father. Just please be careful out there. I know you'll have Octavia with you. Are you sure you guys don't want to come? I don't know if I'll be coming back either, Octavia said, looking from her sister to her parents. I was left on this farm by my father, so I can't leave it now. Their father shook his head slowly. This farm is my whole life now, good and bad memories alike, so I hope you could forgive us for not coming with you. Just please be safe. Don't worry, father. I'll guarantee that nothing shall happen, Octavia smiled. We trust you, Octavia, her mother nodded, tears in her eyes. The images faded away. A blue tile with a fish on it sat in the middle of the room. That was when we all left the farm, wasn't it? Pinky thought, remembering having to leave the farm with her parents' approval. But she hadn't remembered that conversation before they had left. Yet, she was sure it had happened. All of those images were experiences that she had when she was younger. Yet she had forgotten them. Why would I have forgotten those memories? She asked herself as she walked over to the blue tile, before placing it in her bag. There must be a good reason for why I have forgotten. Maybe that other Pinky knows, she then thought to herself as she exited out of the room. The other Pinkie Pie voice huffed softly. You're not in a very fun, Sadie Pinky. If I was told I was being thrown a party, I would just go straight for it. The voice sounded like her with patience was wearing thin. Pinky then walked down the rest of the length of the hallway, reaching towards the door at the end. She pushed the door open, walking inside. Oh, there you are. I was afraid I've gotten lost, which should be weird. How do you get lost in a straight hallway? I mean, I'm sure there is a way, but sure you have delayed the party. The other Pinkie Pie stood in the middle of the room, illuminated by the lantern that hung from the ceiling. The rest of the room was pitch black, except for that circle that showed where she was. Pinky carefully turned off her lantern before storing it back in her bag, then turning to face herself. Tell me, you know what those images were about, don't you? She asked, as seriously as she could. The other Pinky frowned. What? You made me wait for what? That's not very nice, she said, giving a huff. But I forgive you. After all that you are here, we can have fun together, she bounced happily. Please, I want to have fun as much as you do, but I can't enjoy myself unless I have some answers. Pinky shook her head. What happened to Ponyville? Why are there monsters? Why am I seeing the images I'm seeing? I want nothing more than to go back to throwing parties and hanging out with my friends. She lowered her head a little. But I can't. Not so long as all these questions are eating me up inside. The other Pinkie Pie stopped bouncing and just seemed to frown. Fine, I see how it is. The other Pinky turned around. I guess I'll just have to remove that sadness from you, Sadie Pie. Pinky blinked in confusion. She had no idea what this Pinky wanted, but she hadn't answered any of the burning questions. Her thoughts were suddenly stopped as her heart sank. Her ears could hear the siren going off. The light in the room was dimming, turning it pitch black slowly. Oh, no, she beginning to panic as the light faded away completely. She tried to brace herself for anything, as if the world was changing. She could feel it shifting under her hooves. As the siren began to die out, the lantern began to flicker back to life, re-illuminating the spot after Pinky was standing. On the ground around them had turned into rotting, grime-covered floor that appeared to be the first time she had heard the siren. The other Pinkie Pie was standing where she had been, and the only difference now was that she was wearing a strange dress with wings. The other Pinkie Pie began to turn around. The phonograph began to come to life with static. "You know," the other Pinkie Pie spoke up, "playing with myself is really the most fun I'll ever have." She let out a soft chuckle, turning around fully to give Pinky the full view of the outfit. "I'll have to make it last, but all good things have come to an end." Pinky then stared at the outfit, beginning to notice the details, and she wished she hadn't. The wings on the back, 6 in total. They were each different colors and were suddenly crudely stitched on. Around her neck was a necklace, multiple unicorn horns dangling from it. The cloth in her dress would look like made out of patchwork quilt, made out of leather. Each square of the dress had a different cutie mark on it. "Oh, do you like my dress?" The other Pinkie Pie noticed her gaping stare. The other Pinkie angled her body to show it off better. "I'm so glad you like it. I worked very hard to make it. It wasn't easy getting everything to be intact. Ponies really like to squirm, you know." She laughed as she gently played with one of her wings. "I'm quite proud of how it came out too. But I must admit, I've seen something that even I can add that would make it even better." The lantern grew brighter, illuminating more of the room, revealing the table that had been hiding in the darkness. The other Pinkie Pie walked towards the table, reaching into a medical bag that was placed on the table. From the bag she pulled out a large sharp butcher's knife. "Now be a good pony and hold still, will you? I don't want to mess up this beautiful cutie mark of yours," the other Pinkie said, as if it was a natural thing. Before putting the butcher's knife in her mouth, the phonograph began to let out its wailing rings. Pinky's heart felt like it stopped. She couldn't even compare herself to everything as the other Pinkie was saying, but it was very clear that the other Pinkie wasn't going to give her a chance. The other Pinkie began to full charge gallop towards her. The other Pinkie appeared to be aiming for her legs. She jumped out of the way as the knife came close to cutting deep into her. She tried to hold herself back up away from the other Pinkie, into the darkness, but she was hit with something hard. She looked behind her, as if following the eyes of the lantern from the ceiling glowed brighter, revealing the entire room to her. She had run into dried remains of a pony, dangling from the ceiling by a butcher's hook. She then jumped away, not wanting to even touch her eyes, as she began seeing the decorations of the room. She felt her stomach reach for her throat. Pony bodies hang from several parts of the room. Their bodies, dried and caked of pools of blood, lay underneath them. Skulls fully decorated the walls, while the furniture made out of bones and skin. Balloons floated that were dried blood. Streamers and ribbons had been given the same treatment. Piles of body parts and organs lay stacked against the corners of the room. On one table was a medical bag, appearing to be the darkness that had hid it before, the plate adorned with 4 folds surrounding it, with a pile of cupcakes in the center of the plate. Her ears twitched as she heard the galloping hooves and jumped into the air, as the sound of the blade being swung struck the body she had run into. Pony ran away from the twisted version of herself, panting heavily as she galloped to the other side of the room. She then turned around, watching the other people as her pulled the knife out of the body. "Sadie Pie, this isn't any fun with you, just keep running," the other Pinkie Pie said cheerfully, pulling a knife out of her body. "I admire you, though. You will have to fight. I like that in a pony," she chuckled happily as she placed the knife back into her mouth. The other Pinkie Pie, everything said the same. Happy voice, it terrified her, thinking so much it could be with such a happy tone, that Pinkie had every intention of killing her, and not very quickly. It was obvious that she wanted to make it slow and painful process. The other Pinkie was charging in. She could hear the dodge from its distance, although she jumped out of the way, avoiding Pinkie. "Ah!" she cried out in shearing pain, sailed across her right leg. She stumbled away as she looked at the other Pinkie, who was giggling, blood dripping from the end of the butcher's knife. The other Pinkie looked at her, tilted her head, changing direction where she had dodged. The knife had cut deeply into her leg. She could feel the same blood trickling down her leg. With a playful hoof stomp, the other Pinky broke into another charge straight towards her. She mustered with all of her strength to jump out of the way. Gah! She let out another painful cry as a gash down her cut on the back of her leg, causing her to trip and collapse onto the ground. Her leg twitched in pain as the gash reached diagonally down her left leg. She was severely bleeding now. The other Pinky was able to maneuver her too well to dodge. The attacks had all been immobilized her movement now. I give you an A for the effort, but C for the execution. So that gives you a good round, B, the other Pinky said cheer happily for her. I do hope you won't completely give up once you lose those legs, though. I know it'll be tough, but keep on fighting. The twisted words sounded so cheerful, it sickened Pinky. She then turned her head to watch the other Pinky put the knife back into her mouth. She had come up to her from behind and was raising her head now. She was going to bring the knife down, bring it down to right into her legs. With all of her might, she pulled her leg back in, as the other Pinky began to throw her head down with all of her might to chop off the leg. Pinky bucked the leg with all of her might right into the other Pinky's jaw. A loud crack sounded throughout the room, as Pinky felt the body from the other Pinky fly backwards, away from her. She heard a loud thud, followed by a clanging of the knife hitting the ground hard. She panted in pain, trying not to focus so much on the bleeding legs. She turned her head weakly to look into the direction the other Pinky had thrown. The other Pinky groaned, having landed on her back. She rolled over, lying on the ground as if her head wobbled. Her mouth was bleeding severely. She coughed and hacked, bits of teeth and chunks of blood flying out. She panted as best she could to get through the blood oozing out of her mouth. Turning to look at Pinky she had just attacked. The other Pinky tried to speak, but all she spluttered out what sounded like nonsense. She looked in pain as she tried to speak, but she slowly got into her wobbly hooves. Pinky slowly got to her hooves as well, putting weight on her injured legs and made her body cry out in pain for relief. But she did her best to silence the cries. The other Pinky sputtered out more blood as she gripped onto the butcher's knife as best she could with her hoof, dragging it along with the ground as she began to walk towards Pinky. Pinky took in sharp breaths as she concentrated on the vile Pinky mare before her. The other Pinky began to pick up pace before going on a full run straight for Pinky. She seemed groggy but determined to bring that knife down to Pinky's flesh. Pinky had just aimed on the uninjured half of her body, and at the other Pinky, bringing her hind hoof up once more. As the butcher's knife was raised into the air, sparks flying as it had scraped along the ground, a frantic rush of the other Pinky was closing in, ready to strike down. For a moment, everything seemed to hold still. Right in front of the edge of death, two faces that should have never have met collided. The butcher's knife flew in the air, impaling itself to the ground. A loud crunching sound broke through the air. Pinky's hind legs had struck, landing with all of its might onto the victim's throat. The other Pinky's eyes shrunk as her windpipe was crushed, her forward energy being matched by forced step of the neck. Her body betrayed itself and swung itself free to the ground, her whole body being shifted out from under the power of the kick, hitting the ground with a hard thud. The Pinky jerked and twitched onto the ground with all of its might to try and get its air from its broken windpipe, only to be filled with blood that poured freely from her neck. She jerked and squirmed as her eyes rolled into the back of their head. It seemed as last for an eternity, but the body finally stopped squirming as life escaped it. The only thing that could be heard was the loud panting of Pinkie Pie. Her phonograph had gone silent. She had stared at the corpse that lay before her. She saw herself dead by her own hoof. She seemed to have numbed the pain that she was trying to course through the body, her mind beginning to fall into a haze of the amount of blood she was losing down her legs. It seemed insignificant at the moment. All she could do was stare numbly at her lifeless body before her. Nothing else seemed to exist in the world. However, her mind had begun to receive signals that her body was sending. She needed medical attention. Her legs became shaky as she began to take her first step. She limped, putting on as much pressure on her injured legs as possible, over to the medical bag. She carefully pried it open, looking inside. There were so many sharp instruments, scalpels, syringes filled with strange liquid, and even a saw for cutting bones. However, she saw a roll of gauze bandages. She carefully wrapped it. Pulling it out of the bag, she unrolled the length of it before carefully but tightly wrapping it around her wounds. She wrapped it slowly but surely, wrapping up the large cut on their hind leg, the smaller cut on and then the smaller cut on the front leg. The bandages quickly soaked with blood, but they would heal her wounds for the time being. She placed the remaining gauze inside of her bag, then turned towards the exit. She slowly limped her way back up the gloomy lit hallway. Walking past the steel doors, she carefully began to climb up the stairs, her wounds slipping once or twice due to the grime that had gotten all over them. The climb was slow, her body ached with pain and exhaustion, but she made it to the top. She slowly walked across the rotting floor of Sugar Cube Corner, heading straight for one of those grime-covered corners. In a dry spot on the counter sat a brown bottle, the label of it called a health drink. Pinky dueled her mind a bit and pulled the cap out of it with her mouth, before taking it and drinking the whole thing. The drink tasted a mix of bitter herbs and strawberries for the flavor, but it was a lot like drinking medicine. But her body was grateful to have the liquid inside of her. She placed the empty bottle back on the counter and slowly trudged to the middle of Sugar Cube Corner. She lay down panting heavily, as the haze of her mind finally come to a stop, as she went on to an uncomfortable sleep.